Hello, everyone, and welcome to our new video series, Energy Matters, where we'll bring in industry experts and discuss important topics related to the energy industry. Today's guest is Mark Stillman, the Director of Business Development for Silverline Solutions and President of Energy Edge Advisory Group. We're so glad to have you today, Mark. Let's start with an easy one. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the excellent work that you do in the industry?
Yes, I head up business development for Silverline Solutions. We're a really great IT private cloud hosting business in the energy space. We also have a software division that has My Fuel Portal and the Energy Engine, which are online engagement tools. We have a really niche focus and a vertical focus on the downstream fuels, propane and heating oil space. I'm also the president of Energy Edge Advisory Group, which is a specialized advisory firm, and we work for technology companies mainly serving the energy space. But in specific situations, we also work on the dealer and supplier side. And through all of that, I've kind of gained a really intense sort of PhD in the industry and a really interesting panoramic view. It's not because I'm the smartest guy in the room. It just seems that I've been blessed with being exposed to a lot of great things in the industry.
When we look at 2022, one of the emerging themes that seems to saturate the talks during the shows and just during the among the dealers, it seems to be environment. And with that comes all the changes, the fear, the worry, and you can even say the doom and the gloom. You mentioned before that one of the often overlooked effects of all of these regulations is that it drives down the overall refining capacity, where we actually are now in danger of experiencing shortages. Can you elaborate on that?
I'm sort of preaching to the converted here, I think, for most dealers. But it is interesting that some dealers are a little unaware of how heating oil, which is really now diesel, is so whiplashed by global geopolitical events. It wasn't always that way in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't that way, right? It was really a supply and demand market, but now it's much more complex. And the environmental actions in this country. Listen, I have an 18-year-old daughter. I'd like the world to not be on fire when she grows up, but at the same time, I think we have to take a realistic approach to the environmental issues and climate change, and certainly as it relates to our industry. The panic move by government and political action committees and a variety of different forces in our system, that fear that they're instilling, that move away from fossil fuels without any real plan for what else is going to be there, has caused a panic. Right? The smart people are saying, wait, slow down. We can't go that fast. Fossil fuels are sort of an intrinsic part of what we need to do as an energy culture in this country and around the world. But there's no plan there, but it has scared the major oil companies into reducing their investment in infrastructure. And those investment reductions have caused huge problems because there's not as much refining output. There's not as many pipelines. As you know, the pipeline was killed by the current administration. And I'm not taking a political stance. The problem is that we're moving way too fast towards the environmental change that needs to happen on some reasonable level. And it is creating huge problems on our dealer and our customer side and on the industry side, because without that refining capacity and production and without the ability to transport it and logistics of that, you end up with what happened this year, right? You have huge shortages and huge problems meeting demand. And then you have Europe suddenly going offline because of the Ukraine conflict. And then people in this country are wanting to ship everything overseas because they can get more money for it. It's not like we're cut off from the world. So huge exports go, and then that created this massive problem where gasoline price spiked, natural gas prices blew up, heating oil and prices blew up, and of course even propane was whipsawed by that a bit. And I think the unwitting, sort of victims of all of that are the energy consumers, first of all, energy suppliers like our customers, second of all. They're in the vortex.
You mentioned propane being affected with all that's going on as well, but to me, it seems like it's less affected. It's kind of sitting on its own little corner, not so much whiplashed by all the crazy ups and downs of what's happened. So why do you think is that's what's happening?
Well, I think propane is a really unique industry. And I certainly don't want to cast aspersions at my friends in the heating oil industry, because when I came into energy, and I was not born into it, I came into it by pure accident, it was on the heating oil side.
Mhm.
So this is not a value judgment of heating oil versus propane. It's just the realities of living in different worlds. I presented at a conference this year. I've been calling it the Great Schism, how heating oil and propane now are really going in different directions. And so let me just round out that thinking a little bit. There's no doubt that propane is being affected, that the global supply crunch and exporting propane and all those things have impacted the industry. But it's unique in that we have plenty of our own propane here. The supply chain is really much more in control, a little more insulated from the geopolitical forces in the world. I don't want to, go into too much detail there, but nor do I want to insult people's intelligence. Of course, it's affected by much less.
Mhm.
For instance, the prediction for this year is that propane is going to be going up in price by 5% in 2023. Like, wow, 5%. Yes, it's important, but it's not nearly what we're seeing in the distillate space, right? So I think that's one important distinction. I think there's more stability in the commodity side of propane that helps that industry stay strong and grow strong. I think inventories are good where we have a real inventory crunch on the distillate and ULSD side or ultra low sulfur diesel side. You don't have that big supply problem on the propane side. Inventories are good. Exports are shrinking right now. I think one of the reasons the outlook for prices is better, and we've seen a fall off in prices, is we were pushing tons of propane overseas. Now China and India are probably going to get it cheap from Russia and some kind of side deal, and that's cutting off exports. I think the more important thing about propane, and the reason I like the way you say they're kind of sitting off in the corner happy, is that unfortunately the heating oil space is shrinking, and it has been shrinking.
Mhm.
Right, there was 10 billion
Mhm.
gallons of U.S. consumption in the late 90s. There's probably barely 4 billion at this point. Huge demand destruction there, right? Most of that was caused by natural gas and the fracking boom. But propane's actually growing, right? They were affected too by the natural gas fracking, but now you're seeing them grow. Predictions are 5 to 8% a year between now and 2027, 2028. So we have a growth industry versus a contracting industry. So you have this inoculated market. You have a really cool growing industry with lots of different applications of motor fuels and agriculture and all different things. And then probably the most important thing to sort of close the loop here on the distinction between heating oil and propane is that propane is viewed as a renewable clean fuel, right? So it's pretty easy. There's lots of
Mhm.
manufactured propane in a sustainable way, and I think that it has a very clean story, right? It's a gas. It doesn't have a smelly tank in
That's
your
right. Yep.
basement, right? It has the same carbon footprint as natural gas, so it has kind of latched on to the natural gas clean emission story. So while it will be caught up in any carbon taxes that exist, it is seen as a clean fuel. And I used to joke presenting that in the Titanic battle between heating oil, propane, and natural gas back in the mid 2005s, 2010s, the unwitting winner would be propane, because it does way more, way easily than natural gas can. It's easier to remain safe in some of these off heat applications. So I think that really the green thing is so huge, Fareed, in that it is playing to the green story, and that I think has put a really strong tailwind behind propane.
So you mentioned, Mark, that propane has this green story that it's trying to tell. But if I'm looking around at the response, and especially sort of the assertion from the environmentalists out there, it seems like they're pushing back on that assertion, right? They're casting doubts and saying that no. What do you think about that?
Well, well, I think that the story, and I mean this in no way to dismiss your position, but it's really a complex story, and I don't pretend to know it all either. But I
Uh-huh.
think there's a lot of disinformation, and I don't want to be a fake news guy, 'cause that's not what I'm saying. I
Yep.
think that there's data and facts can be distorted depending on how they're presented. I think a lot of the anti-propane story that you're getting from the environmental side is largely driven by the lobbying groups, natural gas lobbying groups, right, which are by hundreds magnitude bigger than any heating oil or propane, right? So
Mhm.
if they can fill the zone with a lot of information, then it'll appear that propane is a problem. In reality, from a carbon footprint perspective, if you get to the science of it, it's really just a different version of natural gas. There's no risk of spills. There's no risk of oils, dead birds on the beach or whatever. So I think a lot of that, Fareed, is really, really smart lobbying and disinformation, or if not disinformation, information packaged in a very unusual way for a negative impact.
All right. So let's bring it back. So
Yeah,
we've
sure.
got serious problems in a distillate world, obviously, and even propane is dealing with its own sets of problem. You've always championed. We are missing the mark in the way we respond to these challenges. You're saying fuel dealers are often focusing on the wrong things when responding to these challenges. Why do you think that?
I think that in the final analysis, that this is not so much a war with environmental groups as it's a war for our customers.
Mhm.
I hate to break it to anybody, but the environmental changes in terms of how it impacts industries and how we electrify everything, so much of that is fantasy oriented. It's going to take a very long time. That's all I know. So between here and there, probably measured in decades and not just a few years. Between now and then, I think it's a war of our customers, that there's customers are being lured away by electric companies, not so much natural gas now, because natural gas has gotten extraordinarily expensive. That industry
Yeah.
has suddenly gotten very quiet, but it's promoted as a clean fuel when it's anything but. But certainly the Electrify Everything movement is, even in Maine. I live in northern New England and New Hampshire, and in Maine, there's been this huge push to move people to electric source heat pumps in Maine. And I'm laughing to myself, think I know the technology is better and this and that, but that's an enormously expensive way to get heat in your house, right? But the consumers are being lured away. I think we need to pay more attention to that war. And that war is, can we create an environment and a culture in our industry where our consumers are less vulnerable to that luring away? And I think that is one area that the dealers are not focused on. They spend a lot of time reading about the end of the world and the end of the industry, but they're dealing with things that are completely out of their control, other than donating money to anybody that's lobbying on behalf of the heating oil and propane space in Washington. You're way better served focusing and obsessing about retaining your customers, banding together as an industry to create a place that people want to stay versus a place where people want to leave.
Yeah, and you've talked about that a lot, about the real need for us to focus on what truly matters. Like, if I've already said, keeping the main thing, right? Like, which is a huge deal. What do you see is one of the dealers to retain their customers these days? You've mentioned before that this is a situation, a war that we have not seen before. It's unlike what we've seen in any of our past history. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think what you bring up a really great point, which is we've had a lot of wars in our history, right? So literally and figuratively. And I think that the propane and heating oil industry, or downstream fuel space, has been through its challenges over the years, whether it's supply, whether it's the globalization of commodities, whether it's hedge funds buying investments in commodities and really mucking up the supply and demand. We've had that. We've had the war against natural gas. This war is unprecedented because it involves a gigantic global movement that is way overshooting their objectives in the reality of timelines. But more than anything, consumers get caught up in that, right? We're all emotional creatures. I think that this war is uniquely different because it is a war for our customers and not against our competitors. And it's actually against an unknown, unseen enemy, right? We don't even really understand the electric space. We don't even really understand that lobby and how powerful it can be. So we obsess about the end of the world. Meanwhile, we're not focusing enough of our time, not everywhere. There are some dealers who are immensely good at customer experience. I do not want to paint a broad stroke here, but as an industry, I'm afraid we are distracted. It's like, hey, look over here, look over here, look over here, and we're not taking care of home, right? We're not taking care of our own businesses. We're not focusing on consumer forces. We're not focusing on consumer technology. We're not focusing on driving out costs of our business to keep prices under control. We're not focusing enough on what does a modern consumer demand from us now, because it's very different than it was even 3 years ago, 5 years ago. So I think I would say that this war is unique because we've never had to basically say, what can we do better for our customers? What experience can we deliver that is so exemplary and so solid that they're not lured away by the silliness of some of these things. They're not so vulnerable. And that's why I would rather dealers focus not on the end of the world, not on the commodity forces and the Russian oil deal and not on Electrify Everything, but let that stuff play out. It's 100% out of your control. Focus on your business. Please stay focused on your business. Let that noise just happen and work itself out. And we will adjust and we will adapt. And we have bio heat and biodiesel, and we have emerging technologies there that are amazing. We have renewable propane, and propane alone is amazing. I think focus on the business. Don't lose focus there, and don't be distracted.
It's so refreshing to hear that message, right? In the middle of what some people are saying is a doom and gloom, going back to the basics almost is kind of the key solution to getting ahead and just kind of overcoming the current challenges there. So I want to bring this home on a positive note. This has been great.
Absolutely.
So you've mentioned a few things there on what fuel dealers could be doing, technology, and just several other things practical steps that fuel dealers can be taking. What's the one thing that you think fuel dealers overlook the most that they can be doing today, Mark, to really prepare themselves and really rise above the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, it's very easy for me to answer that, but let me just one quick preamble is that I am. If anybody's ever talked to me or seen me speak or done anything or had a couple of drinks with me, I can be realistic in a harsh way about the industry, but it's only because I love this industry. Like I said, I wasn't born and raised in it, and I don't pretend to be in the secret club. But I really love this industry. I love how intimate the relationships are with consumers. I love the community-centric nature of this industry. And I have a real altruistic sense to me for these dealers. And there is a lot of empathy that I have because they're facing unimaginable challenges as an industry that they've never faced before as owner and operators. But I remain massively optimistic. Counterbalance to that sort of pragmatic sort of style that I have is this industry has the ability to thrive and adapt and adjust. And it's already doing those things quietly. So the answer to your question comes in two parts. Systemically, I would say this industry has to continue to focus on ways to adapt and adjust on the green side, biodiesel, renewable propane, getting out in front of consumers more with that story. We have the power, and every day that goes by, that technology gets better and better. And there's some amazing people in this industry that dealers can partner with in that regard. The direct answer to your question is consumers. And this is one area where I am often sort of harshly critical of dealers in that, in general, not everywhere, the consumer is still not as important as they should be. This is an operations-obsessed industry. We love trucks and we love logistics and we love buying put and call options and doing all this stuff. But you have to sort of defocus operations and refocus on the consumer. The only people capable of saving this industry are our customers. They're going to decide whether they stay with us or whether they don't. And we have to treat them with that level of gravity. So I would say the answer is focus on your customers, deliver the best experience, obsess night and day about having good technology, about embracing their needs, about adjusting to how they want to do business with you, break down all the barriers of they're either automatic or they're will call, or that's not how consumers think. We're applying really old logic to a very sophisticated customer. So please focus there, all of your attention.
Well, Mark, that's certainly super practical, and I'm really, really glad that you brought all of this to all of our attention today. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon
Thank
here
you.
with us doing this interview. So, yeah, thanks, Mark, and I hope that we'll get the chance to talk again in the future.
Great, appreciate it. Thank you. Very flattered by the opportunity.